Hi there and welcome to today's video. This is Tableau in 2 minutes, but today's video is going to take a little longer than 2 minutes. And that's because we're going to walk through the entire process you need to build a story in Tableau using a dataset. So we're going to take the dataset, we're going to build ourselves a dashboard in Tableau, and then we're going to come up with a story based on the data that we have, as well as some visuals that go along with that story and maybe a little bit of commentary as well. So without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our data. Now, I love to travel, so I picked some data on global airport rankings. Sounds like fun, right? This data has data for about 190 airports. We have the IATA code, the airport code, the location. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to scroll through this data and try and get a sense of what we're looking at and what we might be able to do with it. I picked this data from Makeover Monday. It's on data.world, so I'll put a link to the data in the video description and you can take a look at it yourself and decide what you might want to do with it. Now, we have, as I said, the IATA, the airport, where it is in the world, along with a score across these 4 different categories. So we have this air help score, the on-time performance of the airport, the customer opinion, and the food and shops. Those are our 4 variables, really, the things that we want to take a look at. The other nice thing that we have within this data set is we also have the longitude and latitude, as well as this centroid column. It's nice to have those in there because that means that we can build out some maps and things like that. But there isn't a ton of data in here. There isn't a ton of fields. So let's go ahead and think about who we might be able to use this for. And we're going to be thinking about that as we're looking at the data before we even dive into Tableau. This could be useful for somebody who travels frequently. It could be useful for airport designers. It could be useful for flight crews or pilots to see what the rating is of the airport they're flying into. We could have it be useful for local authorities, right? Travel professionals, people looking for resources. There's a lot of people that could make use of this type of data. Now, we can't design a story, we can't build a dashboard for all of those different audiences. What we need to do is we need to really pick one audience and be very specific about how we're going to address that audience. That's the key to storytelling. The key to storytelling is to be very, very focused about who you're talking to, how you're talking to them, and what you're telling them. So let's say that the audience that we want to design something for is a local authorities audience or somebody who's looking at upgrading their airport. Let's say that we've been tasked with understanding what the traits are amongst the best and worst airports in the world so that when we design and build our own local airport, we can understand where we should invest our money to make sure that the customer experience is top-notch. It's worth noting that we haven't really dug into the data at all yet. What we've done is we've looked at an overview, but from there we've tried to understand what sort of an audience we might be speaking to and what sort of problems they might be able to solve. That's going to help us as we dive into the data to understand which fields are the most important, how we might want to slice it, and the sort of visuals that we want to use, which is going to make the process of building out our story a lot faster than it is if we just go in there cold trying to look for something that works for everyone. Alright, so I've gone ahead and connected to the AirHelp Global Rankings data in Tableau. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our first sheet and see what we can pull out. Now, you can see that all of our fields are over here on the left. So why don't we just go ahead and pull out this air score. And then we'll see by airport. Actually, you know what? Let's do by IATA. We can see that we get a good selection of airports. Why don't we pull out some of our other scores as well and see if there's any sort of correlation or connection between all of these. So I pulled out this is all 4 of our variables. Now you can see that the air help score and the customer opinion and the food and shops seem to be all slightly different. The on-time performance, that looks like it might be a bit more connected, but there's quite a bit of variance across these scores, although it does seem like there's a correlation, at least on the surface, in all of the different pieces. So that's interesting. We'll take a look at that in more detail in a second. Why don't we go ahead and let's use our longitude and latitude to see if we can pull these out onto a map. So we'll use our latitude, then our longitude, and then we're going to drag the airport code out onto the marks card. And then we're going to reverse the columns and the rows because I always put them in the wrong place. Now we have a map with all the dots representing all of the airports that we have. Let's go ahead and drag out our score onto the color here. It's helped a little. Let's do this. Let's take a look and change the colors to be slightly different. So we're going to do red blue. I like my red blue. I also prefer stepped color. Let's use all 5 steps though. Okay. Ooh, okay. So now there's some interesting things happening, right? We have some trends happening in Europe where we seem to have a lot of lower rated airports in Europe. Have some higher rated ones here in the Middle East, quite a lot of higher rated ones in Latin America. And then across the US and Canada, we have sort of a range of different airports. There's also a lot of dots that are quite hard to see. I'm not sure if we necessarily want to keep this middle color because that is hard to see against the gray background, but we'll get to digging into that a little more as we get deeper. Why don't we jump back into, so I've got our bar chart here. I think we should jump into taking a look at some of these correlations between these different variables. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a new sheet. We're going to drag IATA out onto the detail card again. That's given us longitude and latitude, which we don't want this time. Why don't we take a look at the air help score? We're going to put that as our Y variable. And then we're going to look at customer opinion. Well, you see there's sort of there is a correlation there for sure. Let's look at food and shops. Oh, a little bit less of a correlation, but still a correlation. And then on-time performance. So there's quite a strong correlation between on-time performance over here on the right-hand side, the food and shops, and the customer opinion. But the strongest one with this air help score is definitely the on-time performance, which is interesting. What we really want though is that if we're building an airport, do we really want to use the air help score if it has such a strong correlation with on-time performance, or do we want to look at the customer opinion? Let's take a look at how some of these things specifically correlate with the customer opinion. So we'll open up a new sheet. I'm going to put customer opinion as our Y variable, and then I'm going to add the food and shops and the on-time performance as our X variables. I'm going to drag IATA out to give us the detail. And you can see there actually seems to be a stronger correlation between the food and shops than there does between the on-time performance when we look at how those correlate with our customer opinion. So if we were designing an airport, or we were thinking about upgrades that we might want to make to our local airport, because we're the local airport authority, just going back to how we were thinking about our audience, I might be more interested in looking at the food and shops than I am about the on-time performance for our airport. On-time performance is obviously important, but the customer opinion seems to be more driven by the food and shops than it does by that on-time performance. So now we have a few things that we can look at. We have some of these correlations. We have this map, which shows us where the best and worst airports are. And then we have this bar graph of all of the different factors that go into this air help score. What we're going to do now is we're going to begin to build out some of these pieces and put them in a dashboard that allows us to sort of tell the story of what's impacting this customer opinion, what correlates with it. So let's go ahead and jump into a sketching tool where we can begin to sketch out what our dashboard is going to look like. All right, so I've gone ahead and jumped into Canva here, and we can go ahead and sketch out our design on this whiteboard right here. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to draw us a big old box. And we're going to use this to represent the area that we have to design. And not super clean, doesn't need to be super clean. And I do like the map. I like the map, but I want us to keep it somewhere out the way because I don't think that information is primary. So maybe let's put the map down here in the bottom corner. We have the correlations. I like the correlations. There's definitely some value in those. So we want to keep those on the page. And I like the bar graphs, but I think let's maybe put the bar graphs as the most prominent piece on this dashboard. So we'll start with them in the top left up here. And I think it would be worth having two, right? Because we want to see the best practices, but also the worst practices. So we'll look at the top and we'll look at the bottom. We'll have a bar graph for each. Over here, this can be best. And over here, this can be worst. Then maybe we have our correlations below them. We can have that down here. This down here. These are our correlations. And then over here, we'll put our map. Now, these sizes will change, but I think what we've got is a layout where we can see and answer some of the critical questions that somebody's going to have. We have an idea of who the best and the worst airports are. We have a space that shows the correlation between the customer experience and the on-time performance, which is going to help us focus on that food and shops insight that we found. We also have a map, which is going to highlight where in the world some of these best and worst airports are. I'll show you how to do that. We'll make it super clear on this map as we build it out in Tableau. We're not going to use the same map that we have built right now. And then up here, we have a space for some commentary. And commentary is what makes this different than just a regular dashboard. If this was just a regular dashboard, we might allow people to sort of explore the data on their own, click through into stuff, and come up with their own conclusions. But what we're going to do is we're going to add commentary that says what's happening within this dashboard. You know, what is this telling us? What are the trends we found within the best airports and the worst airports? And then how can we use that information to do something actionable, like better design the airport that we're trying to build? All right, let's jump back into Tableau and begin building this out. So first thing we'll do is we're going to create ourselves a new dashboard. I'm going to make this a reasonable size. So we're going to go with a fixed size. I always like a generic desktop size dashboard, but maybe we'll change that. I kind of want it to be a little bit higher. Whoops, I went a little bit too high. There we go. And so we have some sheets that we could pull out, but none of them quite do the things that we wanted them to do on the dashboard. So we're going to begin building out sheets that are specifically designed for our dashboard. So let's go ahead and duplicate sheet 1. We're going to call this the top airports. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep only the customer opinion. That was the one that we wanted to focus on. So we're going to pull off all of these other variables until we just have customer opinion. And then we're going to keep the top 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep only. And what we've done there is we've added a filter on this IATA number. Now, that's not going to make sense to everyone which airports these are. The IATA is the international code, but we probably also want the airport name when we display this on the dashboard. So let's go ahead and pull our airport. We'll add it to the rows shelf. And right here, we'll make this a bit bigger. Right here, you can see that we have our top 5 airports in terms of the customer opinion. Let's go ahead and we're just going to duplicate this sheet again since it has the information we want. And we're going to call this the bottom airports. We're going to remove this filter from the IATA number, resort the customer opinion. And oh, look, Newark is right at the top of the list. That's not shocking to anyone who's flown through Newark, I will tell you. So we're going to keep these 5 right here. And these are the bottom in terms of customer opinion. So now we have 2 graphs. We're going to do more with these in just a second. But first off, let's go ahead and create the other sheets that we want. So we have our 2 bar graphs. We want to create our 2 correlation charts because those are down at the bottom left. We're going to do that by putting each correlation on a different sheet, right? Because one of the things we could do, since we're focused on customer opinion on this sheet, is we could take this visualization and we could add that to our sheet, and then we'd have our 2 correlations side by side, just like they were in our whiteboard. It's going to be easier though if we have 2 separate sheets, just like we did with the top airports and the bottom airports. So let's go ahead and pull those out. Duplicate this sheet. So now we have 2 sheets. I'm going to do this. We're going to call this one the on-time performance sheet, and then we're just going to pull food and shops off this one. We'll go back to sheet 4. This is the original one that we had. We're going to call this one food and shops. And then we're going to go ahead and pull on-time performance on this one. So now we have our two correlation graphs. And then we have our map already. So we'll call this our map. I'm going to go ahead and we'll just put sheet 3 right at the beginning here because we're not going to need that one again. On our map, we have everything highlighted with the different ratings. But we said that we wanted to really focus in on these top and bottom airports. So I'm going to create a calculated field that's going to allow us to highlight the top and bottom airports, and that's going to leave everything else a different color. We're going to go ahead and create ourselves a calculated field. This is going to be top and bottom highlight. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit, which means that I'm actually going to jump through and I'm just going to put in the airport codes for each of the top and bottom airports. What we should do really is we should come up with a ranking for customer opinion. That would be the very Tableau, in air quotes, way to do it. That would be the proper way to do it. But in this case, we're going to cheat because we're not building a dashboard that allows people to explore and highlight and filter in different ways. What we're doing is we're creating a story that we are curating for someone. So we don't necessarily need the flexibility that we otherwise would in a dashboard. And it's a little bit quicker and easier just to do this with an if statement than it would be, or a case statement rather, than it would be for us to do it with a calculated field or a table calculation and pull it through that way. So I'm going to go ahead and type this out. All right, so now I've finished typing out this calculated field. We're pulling out the 5 IATA codes that are the top airports and the 5 IATA codes that are the bottom airports. Let's go ahead and click OK there. Let's go back to our map. We'll test this on our map first. And I'm going to take this top and bottom highlight and I'm going to drag it out to the color shelf. Now you can see that automatically it's assigned the blue, the orange, and the red. We want to change those colors, so I'm going to click into this color shelf right here, and we're going to pick some different and more meaningful colors. The first one I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the middle ones gray because we don't want to look at those. Then we're going to turn the bottom ones red. We're going to turn the top ones, I like blue, but we'll turn the top ones green. How's that? And now you can see that we have a few things popping out. One of the other things we can do is we can also set the sort. I'll show you why I'm going to do that. You see how this airport here is hiding behind this other gray dot. If we sort this field, that will go ahead and take care of that for us. So we'll sort it manually and we'll move the middle ones just below the top and the bottom. And then you'll see how this has popped this green dot out from behind that gray dot. Just looks a little better when we pull that through. Now, we can also use this in a few other places. So let's jump back to our correlations here. If we pull this top and bottom highlight out, we can see where those top and bottoms fall within this food and shops rating. And we can see where they fall within the on-time performance versus customer opinion rating, right? So they all look stronger in terms of on-time performance than the bottom ones, and the top ones here look better in terms of food and shops than the bottom ones too. Now, I don't like the fact that we have this sort of empty circles in the middle. We're going to make this kind of small, so a filled circle is going to help make this clearer. So we'll go ahead and turn those. I just clicked on shape, turned that into a full circle. We're going to do the same up here. I'm going to turn it into a filled circle. And that's going to look better as we pull them out onto our dashboard. All right, so why don't we go ahead and we'll start building out our dashboard here. Let's take, first of all, the map. I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to hold down Shift so that we can float everything. Now, I'm going to get rid of the legend because we don't need the legend. I'm also going to get rid of the title because it just says map. But that gives us a nice anchor point in this bottom corner. Then I'm going to pull out our 2 correlations. So we're going to pull out food and shops. That's kind of big at the moment. We can leave one legend on here. And then we'll pull out the on-time performance. And we'll put it down here. Then we're going to pull out our 2 bar graphs. So let's pull out our top airports. This one's going to come up here. Then our bottom airports, well, we were going to put them right here. But you know what? Now that I look at that, I think because we have the names facing out to the right, we might want to put these horizontally instead of vertically. So let's go ahead and we'll drag this bottom airports underneath. We're going to expand it out this way. We're going to expand this one out this way. And now you can see we have kind of a dashboard happening. We'll move this legend down here. But there's still quite a lot going on, right? This looks messy. There's a lot of visual clutter on the screen. And one of the keys to storytelling is that we want to remove as much of the visual clutter from our dashboards as possible. The reason for that is that we want people to really focus in on the information that we're sharing. We don't want them thinking about, hey, what about this other stuff that I can see? So, excessive titles, too much reading, too many words, gets confusing as we go through this. There's a couple of other things too that I think we need to fix. The first one is that the scales on some of these are different. You see this one goes all the way up to 9 on our top airports, but down on the bottom, we're only going up to about 6, maybe 7. The problem with that is it looks like these bars are the same length, but we want the scales on both to be the same so that we can clearly see the bottom airports are different. I think we also want to filter this the other way so that our bottom airport is actually at the bottom as opposed to being up at the top. Okay, let's go ahead and adjust some of the formatting on these to make that clear. So we'll jump back to our top airports. I'm going to remove this, we're going to set the scale first on this axis to start and end at 10. That's our rating scale. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm also going to remove a bunch of the grid lines. We don't need grid lines. Nobody's going to be looking at our scale and then following stuff across. The specific number actually doesn't matter that much as the magnitude of the bars. So you can see I just right clicked and then format, and then over here on the left hand side I'm going to pull this out. Here we have our fonts, here we have our grid lines. So I'm going to take off all these grid lines. We're going to check that the rows and columns are clear. I'm also going to take away as much of the borders as we can. See how much cleaner that looks already? Now it's pretty clear which airport relates to which row, so you can see that by taking away a lot of this clutter, we've made it a lot cleaner and easier to read. There's less visual noise on the page. I'm also going to go back into this axis. I'm going to go ahead and remove some of the tick marks, or at least I'm going to set the tick marks to be a little less in your face. All right, there we go. So we've reduced the amount on this axis. We've set the axis to be fixed, and we've removed some of the clutter that we have up there. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to hide the field labels up at the top. We know this is the IATA code. We know this is the airport. It's pretty clear. So we don't necessarily need to label these. What we do need is a good name for our graph. It is important that we have a clear name for what we're showing on the page, especially since we took away so much of the other labeling. So we're going to say top airports by customer opinion. Specifically, we're going to say the top 5 airports by customer opinion. Go ahead and click OK. All right, now we said we have this is by customer opinion up here, so we know that this scale down here is customer opinion, so we can also remove this header. Whoops. All right, and now we have a really nice clean graph. And when we go back to our dashboard, you'll see it looks a lot clearer. We can actually take away some of the space that we were using for it up here. And then let's go ahead and do the same with this bottom airports. All right, so now we've fixed our 2 airport bar charts to show us the top and bottom airports. You can clearly see now that since we set the scales the same, there's a difference in the bars. Just need to line these two pieces up as well, so that we have the same. Again, we want the bars to occupy essentially the same space. So I've gone ahead and done that to an extent. We'll fix that up with some layout containers later. Next, let's take a look at our two correlation graphs down here. Again, there's a lot of noise on these, especially if we jump back to our dashboard here. There's a lot of noise, especially as we make them small. Do we really need the scales and the grid lines and the headers and things like that? Well, let's take a look and see what we can take away. Starting here, let's go ahead and, the numbers in this particular case aren't as important as the position of the dots within this group of dots. So what we'll do is we're going to take away, again, almost all of the grid lines. Nobody's tracing numbers across this to try and understand exactly where each one falls. It's the relationship that's the key. So the more we can take away, the better. We're also I'm going to jump into each of these axes. Now we're going to leave the title on these because the title is important to understand what it means when it's going up versus what it means when it's going down. We are going to take off all of the tick marks for both that axis and the other axis. I'll do that in a second. I'm also going to, again, set the scale so that we have a fixed scale of 0 to 10 on both the axes and in both the correlation chart. So we'll repeat this again for our other correlation chart. All right, looks pretty sparse. I'm going to leave the title for now, but you'll see why. So let's jump back onto our dashboard. Now you can see, right, that we have a much cleaner correlation chart. You can still see what's going on. You can still see the same information, but the graph itself has a lot less visual clutter. Let's go ahead and jump into this one, do the same thing. Oops. Now, I was going to jump in and change the titles on these two graphs too, now that we've cleaned them up a little bit and got them looking nice and clear. But what I think we need to do is we actually need to add a title, because this is a correlation. So we need to add a title right here that explains that these are the correlations. Okay, so we'll add that those are the correlations between key variables. We're going to blow that up a bit. And then we're going to let that sit right above it right here. And we can actually, again, delete this title, because once we know these are the correlations, we already show that this is the customer opinion versus food and shops and the customer opinion versus on-time performance. So we've removed some duplicative information by removing the title on top of each of those charts and putting in a single title for both charts. Again, as we tell a story, the key is to be as concise and as clear as possible. Let's do the same thing with our map. Let's go ahead and jump to the sheet here. Now, there's a few things that we can change with our map. We can change the color, we can change the transparency of the background. But if we jump into our menu here for our map, we can go to background layers. Right here, we can begin to remove some of this visual clutter with borders and things like that. Most people know what the world looks like. Where specifically some of these things are is not necessarily what we want to dive into. And if people did, they can easily hover over each of the dots in order to find out more information about that particular airport. So I've gone ahead and removed borders and the country names. There's a couple of different styles we can use. This light style is pretty good. We can also begin to wash out the background. So if we turn this all the way up, you'll see that it gets very transparent. Now it's probably a bit too much for us, but certainly removing some of the clutter is a really good way to start. So let's go ahead and set it about 30. You can see it's washed out the background just a bit, but we can still see the outline of the land masses, which means that we can identify where some of these airports sit. All right, much cleaner in terms of formatting. We still have a space up at the top. We're going to use that for commentary. We'll talk about that in just a second. But one of the last things we want to do is we just want to add a title to the overall dashboard. So top and bottom airports by customer opinion. Now this data was from 2023, so I'm going to put 2023. Oops. Make that a bit bigger. Maybe a little bit bigger than that. Nice big title. We'll pull this out so that it sits all the way across the top. Now, we still have some white space up in the top right here. And what I think we should do there is add some commentary. This is where we really get into the difference between a dashboard and a story. When we get to a story, we want to get really specific and really detailed about what we see within our dashboard and what we want people to take from it. We expect this to be printed out. Maybe we put each individual part on a slide and we would share that information. The commentary is the why. So what's going on with these 5 airports at the top and these 5 airports at the bottom that differentiates them both from each other and from the rest of the airports in the world? That's the actionable information that we can begin to take back to our own design committee as we're thinking through designing our own airport. So we're getting back to that concept of speaking directly to an audience. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out 2 more text containers. This first text container, we're going to put in top airport trends. Now we're going to make it big because we're eventually going to fill this with a bit more commentary. And then over here, I'm going to drag out a second one called bottom airport trends. And again, we're going to drag this out to make it nice and big. Now, these two will want to make sure they align. You can see I've made them overlap slightly, but that's okay for the moment. Now, you might be asking yourself, how do we begin to find the information about what is the trends within these top airports versus these bottom airports? And so the easiest way to do that is to begin to actually look for customer feedback on some of these airports. We have the customer opinion data. What we want too is the customer feedback. Let's see what we can pull specifically out of reviews or online opinions about these airports that could maybe give us some idea of what's going on with them. So let's go ahead and jump into Chrome and we'll take a look. So I went ahead and jumped to flightradar24.com and you'll see why in a second. This research that we're about to do to try and find out more information about why these airports are top and bottom is what differentiates your story from just a static dashboard. It's also what's going to make your story most memorable for your stakeholders. These are the little tidbits of information that stick in their mind that help them contextualize the information that we have in the dashboard and make it meaningful to them. So let's go ahead and see what we can find. We'll start with one of our top airports. That's TLL. Go ahead and click on it. I know that if we go to show on map, we can also jump into user reviews. A 4.3 is not bad from what I did in my little bit of research. All right, so we can begin to scan through some of these reviews right here. It's the best airport in the world, small on the outside, big on the inside, very cozy, smaller airport, friendly airport staff, inexpensive restaurant, clean. All right, great feedback. Great feedback. Let's go ahead and look at a different airport here. ICN, that's another one of our tops. We'll go ahead and look at that on a map. And then we'll jump into our reviews right here. Hey, easy to access. Very clean. One of the best airports. Clean, nice staff. All right, so we're getting some trends as we work through these reviews right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the bottom airports too. There we go. Sophia, we'll show that on the map. Ooh, 3.4. It's not a bad first review. Old building. Toilets could be cleaner. Metro only connects to Terminal 2, so hard to access. Not very clean. Short queue. Queue at the gate was long, had a delay, hard to check in, security lines were long. Again, some trends around waiting. Let's take a look at another airport here from the bottom. That's Karachi. We'll jump in again and read the reviews. It's not some great. There we go. Small but neat. Needs some improvement. Security near the boarding gates. Oh, there's some stuff about their personal experience. Yeah, passport queue's huge. Again, we're getting some trends around them maybe not being as clean as our bigger airports. Things being slow and inefficient. So we can use all of those trends to put together some commentary inside our Tableau dashboard. So why don't we go ahead and jump back into Tableau, and I'll put together some commentary based on what I found looking at these airports and looking at some of the other airports. All right, so I went ahead and added to our Tableau dashboard some of the trends that I found as I went through those top 5 and bottom 5 airports. And you can see that the top airports tend to be clean and well maintained. They tend to be efficient. There's plenty of outlets, food outlets, as well as presumably plug outlets. And the bottom airports tend to be not as clean, older, maybe outdated, harder to access, and certainly overcrowded with long lines and fewer places to get food and drink. If we want our airport to be a top airport, to be one that people enjoy going to, we want to make sure that it's clean, it's efficient, and that we have plenty of places for people to sit down and it doesn't feel overcrowded. So that can go into our design specs, and we can use that information as we build our own airport. So thanks for sticking with me as we went through that process of building a story from that airport data. We did quite a few things to the data, but we started off looking at the data, understanding who our audience was, and looking for trends within the data that might be important to them. Then we dug into it, we began to do our analysis in Tableau, but we focused on what our audience wanted and what we could see within the data that might be of interest to them. Once we'd done that, we put together the key points in a sort of dashboard, but really a static view that would allow them to see the top and bottom airports as well as the trends that they had. After that, we cleaned up a lot of the visual clutter that there was in the dashboard. So we removed the grid lines, we cleaned up the colors, and we really focused it down on just the information that would be important and interesting to our audience. And the final thing we did was we dug into some qualitative information about some of these airports. So we went ahead and we looked at Google and we looked at Flight Radar 24 to pull ourselves some information about what the differences were between those top and bottom airports based on the customer reviews that we could find online. And then we put that on the dashboard so that there was a why to go along with the what that we were showing with the quantitative data. Having those whys is critical to letting people connect with your story, so make sure you include them on your next dashboard. If you've enjoyed this video, and we hope that you have, then please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We talk about Tableau, we talk about Power BI, we also talk about data storytelling, data literacy, and how you can use all of this in your everyday job. See you next time.